No one notices the quiet ones, until they're the only thing left that remembers the truth. The shelter was louder than it should have been, metal doors rattling, dogs barking over each other like they were trying to outrun something invisible, and I almost turned around before stepping fully inside because places like this weren't my world, not anymore, but something held me there, something subtle and wrong, like a silence buried under all that noise, and that's when I saw him, sitting in the far corner of the last row, not pacing, not barking, just watching, a full-grown American shepherd with a coat dulled by neglect but posture too controlled to be broken, his eyes following me in a way that didn't feel random, didn't feel like instinct, it felt intentional, and I don't believe in that kind of thing, not after everything I've seen, but still I walked closer, ignoring the staff trying to get my attention, ignoring the other dogs throwing themselves at the gates, because this one didn't move at all, not even when I stopped right in front of him, he just held my gaze. Like he was measuring something, like he already knew the outcome, and that made something in my chest tighten in a way I couldn't explain. I crouched down slowly, my shoes echoing against the concrete, the smell of disinfectant sharp in the air, and for a second, nothing happened, just two of us in that narrow space, breathing the same stale air, until I noticed the collar, worn leather, cracked at the edges, hanging loose around his neck like it didn't belong to this place, like it came from somewhere else, somewhere better. I reached out, not thinking, just reacting, and when my fingers brushed against it, the dog didn't flinch, didn't pull away, just stayed there, steady, patient, like he'd been waiting for that exact moment, and that's when I turned the tag over, expecting a name, maybe a number, something ordinary, but instead I saw words, scratched deep into metal that had been through too much, words that shouldn't have been there, not here, not like this, if found, don't trust the police. I paused, reading it again, slower this time, feeling something cold slide under my skin, because messages like that don't exist by accident, and neither do names, especially not mine. Tell Adrian it wasn't an accident, the world didn't stop, not really, the barking continued, the lights flickered overhead, someone called out from across the room, but none of it reached me anymore, because that name, my name, hadn't been spoken in connection to that night in years, not since I made sure it disappeared. Not since I buried everything that could trace back to it, and yet here it was, hanging from the neck of a dog no one wanted, scheduled to disappear by morning, and suddenly I understood something I hadn't felt in a long time, not fear, not doubt, something sharper, something unfinished. I looked back at him, really looked this time, and for the first time, I saw it, not just an animal, not just a stray, but a witness, a piece of something that refused to stay buried, and when he blinked slowly, calm and certain, I realized the truth I'd been avoiding. This wasn't coincidence. This was a message that had been waiting for me to find it, and whether I liked it or not, it meant one thing: whatever I thought was over, wasn't. The tag felt heavier the second time I read it, like the words had weight now that I understood them, and I did not move for a few seconds, just stayed crouched there while everything around me blurred into background noise, because there are messages you ignore and there are messages that find you. And this one had crossed too many lines to be coincidence. I straightened slowly, still holding the collar between my fingers, and the dog stood at the exact same time, no hesitation, no confusion. Just quiet alignment, like he had already made his decision long before I walked in. "Sir," one of the staff called out, her voice careful, uncertain, probably trying to figure out who I was without asking directly. I did not answer her right away. My eyes stayed on the dog, on the calm way he watched me like I was the one being evaluated, and that unsettled me more than anything else, because I am not used to being the one studied. "How long has he been here?" I asked finally, my voice low, controlled, the way it always is when I am thinking 3 steps ahead. The woman hesitated, flipping through a clipboard like the paper might give her confidence. 3 days, she said, no chip, no records. Someone dropped him off late at night and did not come back. 3 days, that was enough time for someone to disappear completely if they knew what they were doing, or if someone made sure they did. I nodded once, slow, deliberate, then looked back at the dog. "Did he come with anything else?" I asked, and she shook her head. "Just the collar, of course, just enough to be found, just enough to be understood by the right person, not the wrong ones." My jaw tightened slightly, not from anger, but from recognition, because I knew that kind of planning. I built my life on it, and whoever left this dog here knew exactly what they were doing. They knew I would find him, or at least they believed I would. And that meant this was not random, it was directed, intentional, personal. I exhaled. Slowly, the decision already made before I fully admitted it to myself. I will take him, I said, cutting off whatever policy speech she was about to start. Sir, there is a process, adoption forms, background. I said I will take him, I repeated, not louder, just final, and that was enough. People understand tone faster than words, especially when they sense something behind it they cannot quite explain. She nodded quickly and stepped back, giving space she did not even realize she was offering. I opened the gate myself, the metal creaking slightly as it swung wide, and the dog did not rush out, did not bolt like most would. He walked, steady and measured, stopping right beside me like that was always where he belonged. I did not reach for a leash, did not need to, because something about the way he stayed close told me this was not about control, it was about choice, and as we moved toward the exit, I felt it again. That shift under my skin, that quiet certainty that something I buried was starting to surface, and when the cold air hit us outside, the city stretching wide and indifferent in front of us, I glanced down at him once more and spoke without thinking. If you are carrying a message, you better be ready for what comes next. He did not react, not outwardly, but his ears flicked slightly, and for some reason, that was enough to tell me I was already too late to turn back, because whatever truth this dog was tied to, it had already found me, and this time, it was not asking for permission. The engine was already running when we reached the car, a low hum that blended into the rhythm of the city, but everything felt different now, sharper, like the world had shifted half an inch off balance and only I could feel it. I opened the back door without thinking and stepped aside, watching him, waiting to see if instinct would take over, if he would hesitate, if he would run, but he did none of those things. He simply looked at the interior once, then at me, and climbed in with quiet certainty, settling into the leather seat like he had done it 100 times before, and that told me more than any report ever could. This was not a stray, not really, this was a dog that had known structure, discipline, someone who taught him control instead of chaos. I closed the door slowly and walked around to the driver's side, my reflection catching briefly in the tinted window, composed as always. But my eyes gave something away I had not seen in years, recognition. I slid into the seat and pulled away from the curb, the shelter disappearing behind us like it had never mattered, but it did, because it was the starting point of something I had not finished. The road stretched ahead in long lines of asphalt and light, and for a few minutes, neither of us made a sound, just the steady motion of the car and the faint shift of his breathing behind me. I glanced at him through the rearview mirror, and he was watching the streets pass by, not restless, not anxious, just observing, calculating in a way that felt almost human, and that unsettled me again, because animals react, they do not study, unless they have been trained to, or unless they remember something they are trying to place. I tightened my grip on the steering wheel slightly, the message on the collar replaying in my head, every word measured, deliberate, and that last line, my name, it did not belong to chance, it belonged to history. To a moment I had closed off and buried deep enough that no one should have been able to reach it, except someone had, and they had done it carefully, quietly, leaving behind only what I would understand, nothing more, nothing less. I reached one hand back without looking, holding it out just slightly between the seats, a test more than anything, and after a second, I felt it, the light press of his nose against my palm, not demanding, not seeking comfort, just acknowledgement, like he was confirming something, and I let my hand rest there for a moment before pulling it back, exhaling slowly, because that simple gesture settled something in me I did not expect, not trust, not yet, but alignment, like we were already moving in the same direction without needing to say it. The city lights reflected across the windshield as we crossed into quieter streets, away from the noise, toward a place where answers could be found without interruption, and I knew what came next, not because I planned it, but because I had done it before. When something did not make sense, I traced it back to its origin, and right now, the only origin I had was him. I turned slightly in my seat, just enough to look at him directly for the first time since we left. His eyes met mine immediately, steady, unafraid, and I spoke in a tone I had not used in a long time, low, controlled, but carrying weight. You did not end up with me by accident, I said, more to myself than to him, but he held that gaze. Like he understood the meaning behind it, and in that moment, I realized something I had not considered before. Maybe I was not the one who found him, maybe he was the one who found me, and if that was true, then whatever this was, it had been set in motion long before I walked into that shelter, and I was already exactly where I was supposed to be. The gates opened before I even slowed the car, iron sliding apart with the quiet precision that comes from routine, and as I drove through, the world outside disappeared behind us like it had been cut away, replaced by stillness, controlled, intentional, the kind of silence I built my life around. I parked near the entrance and stepped out, the night air cooler here, untouched by the noise of the city, and when I opened the back door, he did not rush out, did not hesitate either. He stepped down onto the stone driveway and paused just long enough to take it in, his head turning slightly, ears adjusting, mapping the space in a way that told me he was already learning it, memorizing it, and that confirmed what I already suspected. This dog had been trained to observe before acting. I closed the door behind him and started toward the house, not looking back, because I wanted to see what he would do without instruction, and I heard it, the soft rhythm of his steps following me, steady, measured, no leash, no command, just choice. Inside, the lights came on automatically, warm and controlled, reflecting off polished floors and quiet walls, everything in its place, everything predictable, except this. I walked further in, removing my jacket slowly, my mind already shifting into the part of me that analyzes, that connects patterns, and I set the collar down on the table, turning it under the light, studying every scratch, every mark, because messages like that are never just written, they are placed, designed to survive just long enough to be found, and the more I looked at it, the more it felt familiar, not the words, but the intention behind them. I had seen something like this before, years ago, back when trust was still something people pretended to have, back when mistakes cost more than money. I exhaled slowly and reached into my pocket, pulling out my phone, hesitating for a fraction of a second before dialing a number I had not used in a long time. It rang once, then again, before a voice answered, calm, alert. Yes, I did not waste time. I need everything you can find on a man named Victor Hale. Silence, brief but noticeable. Then, that name has not come up in years. I looked at the collar again. My reflection faint in the metal tag. It just did, I said, ending the call. Before any more questions could follow, because I already knew what this meant. If Victor Hale was connected to this, then the past I buried was not just resurfacing, it was being handed back to me piece by piece. I set the phone down and turned, finally facing him fully in the quiet of the room. He was sitting now, not by the door, not uncertain, but positioned where he could see everything, including me, and there was something about the way he held himself that made the space feel different, like it was no longer entirely mine, and I stepped closer, slow, deliberate, stopping just a few feet away. If you belong to him, I said quietly, more statement than question, then you know more than anyone else. His eyes stayed on mine, steady, unblinking, and for a moment, it felt like I was not talking to an animal at all, but to a witness that had been waiting for the right moment to be heard. I reached down, my hand hovering for just a second before resting lightly against his head, not control, not ownership, just contact, and he did not move away, did not lean in either, just accepted it, calm and certain. And that told me everything I needed to know. This was not about saving him. This was about finishing something that had been left incomplete, and as I straightened, the weight of that realization settled in fully, because if Victor Hale had left a message for me, then he knew he would not be there to deliver it himself, and that meant whatever happened to him was not what I believed it was, and if that was true, then the story I closed years ago was built on something I had not questioned, until now. The name did not leave my mind after I said it out loud, it stayed there, circling, pressing against everything I thought I knew, because Victor Hale was not a loose end, he was a closed chapter, one I personally made sure would never reopen, and yet here I was, standing in my own house with proof that something about that ending was wrong. I walked past the dog slowly, picking up the collar again, running my thumb over the engraved words like they might change if I looked long enough, but they did not. They stayed exactly the same, deliberate, precise, meant for me and no one else. I moved toward the large window overlooking the grounds, the glass reflecting both of us now, me standing still, him sitting behind me, watching, always watching, and I Realized something that settled deeper than I expected. He was not waiting for instruction, he was waiting for recognition, like his role in this had already been decided long before I stepped into that shelter. My phone buzzed softly in my hand, breaking the silence just enough to pull me back. I answered without looking away from the reflection. "Talk," I said, and the voice on the other end was sharper now, more alert. "Victor Hale has been officially listed as deceased for 5 years, no updates, no reopenings, but there is something unusual." I did not respond, just listened. There were inconsistencies in the original report, minor ones, overlooked at the time, nothing that triggered further investigation, but enough to raise questions now that we are looking again. I felt that cold clarity settle in, the kind that only comes when a pattern begins to form. "What kind of inconsistencies?" I asked. My tone even, controlled, timing discrepancies, missing documentation, and one detail that does not align. I turned slightly, my eyes shifting to the dog again. "Say it," I said, and there was a brief pause before the answer came. There was no confirmed recovery of personal effects. I closed my eyes for half a second, not out of doubt, but out of confirmation, because that meant one thing: the story was incomplete, intentionally so. "Keep digging," I said, ending the call without waiting for acknowledgement, because I already knew what this meant. If Victor Hale left no personal trace behind, then the only piece of him that survived might be right here, sitting in front of me, breathing steadily, carrying a message that had waited years to be delivered. I stepped closer again, slower this time, more deliberate, and crouched down just enough to be at his level, not above him, not commanding, just present. "If you were with him," I said quietly, "then you saw what happened." His ears shifted slightly. Not in fear, not in confusion, but in awareness, like he understood the weight of that statement even if he could not respond, and I reached out again, this time resting my hand against his neck, feeling the steady warmth beneath the fur, grounding, real. "You are not here by accident," I continued, my voice lower now, almost a thought spoken out loud, "and neither am I." He held my gaze, unblinking, steady, and for the first time, I did not see uncertainty in this situation. I saw direction, because whatever truth had been buried was no longer hidden, it was waiting to be uncovered, piece by piece, and this dog, this silent witness, was the first step back into something I had not intended to revisit. But now that I was here, there was no question left about what I would do next. I would follow it to the end, no matter how long it had been waiting. Sleep did not come that night, not because I could not force it, but because something in me refused to step away from what was unfolding. I stayed in the main room long after the lights dimmed, the collar still resting on the table where I left it, and he had not moved far either, choosing a spot near the edge of the room where he could see both the door and me, always aware, always positioned, and that detail stayed with me more than anything else, because it was not instinct, it was training. Deliberate and consistent. I leaned back slightly in the chair, studying him without making it obvious, and every small movement confirmed it, the way his ears adjusted to distant sounds, the way his body remained relaxed but ready, not tense, not nervous, just prepared, like he had been taught to wait. And that raised a question I could not ignore anymore. What kind of man trains a dog like this and then leaves him behind with a message instead of a command? My phone vibrated again on the table, a low sound that cut clean through the silence. I reached for it without hesitation, already knowing this would not be routine information. "Report," I said, and the voice on the other end did not waste time. "Victor Hale was last seen near a private airfield outside the city. Location was cleared within hours. No public records, no follow-up, but there is something else." I sat forward slightly, my focus narrowing. "Go on," I said, and there was a brief pause before the answer came. Measured and precise, there were witnesses, but none of their statements match. Each one describes a different sequence of events, and all of them were dismissed as unreliable. I let that settle for a moment, because that kind of inconsistency does not happen by accident. It happens when something is deliberately obscured, when the truth is broken into pieces so no single version makes sense. "Pull every name connected to that location," I said, my tone calm but final, "and cross-reference anyone who had access to Hale in the last 48 hours before he disappeared." "Understood," the voice replied before the line went silent. I set the phone down slowly, my thoughts already moving ahead, building a structure out of fragments that had not made sense until now, and as I looked back at him, something shifted again, not in him, but in me, because I was no longer trying to understand why he was here. I was starting to understand what he represented. He was not just a witness. He was the only piece left that had not been altered, not rewritten, not hidden behind conflicting stories. He was the constant in a situation designed to erase consistency, and that made him valuable in a way that went far beyond anything I expected. When I walked into that shelter, I stood up slowly and walked toward him, stopping just within reach, not imposing, just present. If they erased everything else, I said quietly, more to myself than to him, then they did not account for you. His eyes met mine again, steady, unchanging. And I saw it clearly now, not confusion, not fear, but purpose, and that realization settled into something solid, something undeniable, because whatever happened that night, whatever truth had been buried under false reports and missing details, this dog had carried it through, silently, patiently, waiting for the one person who would recognize what it meant. And now that I had, there was no separating myself from it, no stepping back into ignorance, because the moment I read that message, the past stopped being finished and became something else entirely. Something active, something unfinished, and as I turned away to prepare for what came next, I understood the one thing that mattered most. This was not about finding out what happened to Victor Hale, it was about uncovering why someone worked so hard to make sure no one ever would. Morning did not change anything, it only made the truth harder to ignore. Sunlight filtered through the tall windows, but the room still felt the same, quiet, controlled, waiting, and he was already awake before I moved, positioned near the doorway again, watching the outside like he expected something to return, or someone, and that detail stayed with me because it was not random behavior, it was expectation. I walked toward the table and picked up the collar again, turning it slowly under the light, every scratch now looking less like wear and more like intention, and the more I studied it, the clearer it became. This was not the original tag, it had been altered, reworked, the engraving too rough in some places, too precise in others, like someone had taken time to add just enough without drawing attention. I set it down and reached for my phone, already knowing what I needed next. I need a full analysis on this, I said as soon as the line connected. Material, engraving depth. Anything that tells me when it was altered. There was no hesitation on the other end, only acknowledgement, and I ended the call before any questions followed, because time mattered now, not in hours, but in sequence. Everything had to line up exactly or it would disappear again. I turned back toward him, and this time he stood before I reached him, not reacting, not anticipating, just aligning again like we were already moving through the same pattern. We are going out, I said quietly. Testing more than instructing, and his ears shifted once, subtle but aware. I walked past him toward the door and did not look back, listening instead, and I heard it, the same steady rhythm of steps behind me, no hesitation, no confusion, just presence, and that confirmed it. He was not following me, he was staying with me. There is a difference. Outside, the air felt sharper, the kind of clarity that comes before something changes. I moved toward the car but stopped halfway, something pulling my attention away, not a sound, not a movement, just instinct. I turned slightly and watched him, really watched him this time, and he had stopped too, his body angled toward the far edge of the property, eyes fixed on something beyond the trees, something I could not see. His posture changed, not tense, not aggressive, but focused, precise, like a memory had just surfaced, and that was the first real signal I had received from him, not passive observation, but direction. I followed his line of sight, scanning the distance, but there was nothing obvious, no movement, no presence, just stillness, and yet he did not look away, not even when I stepped closer. What is it? I asked under my breath, not expecting an answer, but acknowledging the shift, and after a few seconds, he moved, slow at first, then with purpose, heading toward the side path that led away from the main grounds, a direction no one used unless they knew it was there, and that was enough. I did not question it, I followed, because this was no longer about control, it was about understanding, and if he was leading me somewhere, then it meant one thing. The message on that collar was only the beginning, and whatever had been hidden was not just waiting to be found, it was guiding me straight to it. The path narrowed as we moved further from the main grounds, gravel giving way to packed dirt and scattered leaves that had not been disturbed in days, maybe longer, and that alone told me this direction mattered, not because it was hidden, but because it was forgotten, and he walked ahead without hesitation, not rushing, not checking back, just continuing forward like he had been here before or had memorized it from somewhere deeper than instinct. I followed at a measured pace, my attention shifting between him and the surroundings, cataloging every detail the way I always do when something feels off. The trees grew denser, the light dimmer, shadows stretching across the ground in uneven patterns, and yet none of it slowed him down. His movement stayed consistent, deliberate, until he stopped, not abruptly, not reacting, but choosing the exact point to pause. I stepped up beside him and looked ahead, and at first, there was nothing obvious, just a break in the tree line, a slight dip in the ground that could have been natural if not for the way the soil looked disturbed, uneven in a way that did not match the rest of the area. I crouched down slowly, brushing my hand across the surface, feeling the difference immediately, softer, recently shifted, not days ago, not weeks, something more recent than that, and that detail settled in with quiet certainty, because it meant whatever this was, it had not been left behind years ago, it had been revisited, maintained. I glanced at him, and he was watching me now, not the ground, not the trees, just me. Like this was the part one needed to understand on my own. I exhaled slowly and cleared away a thin layer of dirt with my hand, revealing something beneath, not large, not obvious, just a small metal edge barely visible under the surface. I paused for a second, then pulled it free, brushing off the dirt carefully until the shape became clear, a compact storage device, weather-resistant, sealed, not something you leave behind unless you intend it to survive, and that confirmed everything. This was not random, this was placed, intentionally hidden, waiting. I turned it over in my hand, studying it the same way I studied the collar, looking for marks, for patterns, for anything that connected it back to the message, and there it was, subtle but unmistakable, a small engraved line on the side, barely visible unless you knew to look for it, the same uneven precision as the collar, the same hand, the same intention. I stood slowly, the weight of it settling in, because this was no longer a question of whether something had been hidden, it was proof that someone had planned for this moment, had left a trail knowing it would be followed, and I looked at him again, really looked this time. You brought me here, I said quietly, not as a question, but as acknowledgement, and he held my gaze, steady, calm, like he had been waiting for that recognition. Like this was the exact point where his role shifted from silent witness to something more, something active. I closed my hand around the device, my thoughts already moving ahead, connecting the collar, the message, the inconsistencies, and now this, a piece of something that had been protected long enough to reach me. And that meant whatever was inside was not just information, it was truth, unfiltered, unaltered, the kind that cannot be rewritten once it is seen. I turned back toward the path, already knowing this was only the next step, not the end, and as he fell into place beside me again, not ahead this time, but aligned, I understood the shift, because he was no longer leading me forward, he had already done that. Now we were moving together, toward something that had been waiting long enough to change everything. I did not open the device right away, not because I was unsure, but because timing matters when the truth has been buried this carefully. I walked back toward the house with him beside me, the same steady presence, no longer leading, no longer waiting, just there, like whatever distance had existed between us when we first met was gone, replaced by something quieter, something understood. Inside, the air felt different again, heavier this time, like the walls themselves were holding on to something they had not known before. I placed the device on the table next to the collar, two pieces of the same message finally in the same place, and for a moment, I just stood there, looking at them, letting everything align in my head, the inconsistencies, the missing records, the altered narrative, all of it pointing toward one conclusion. Victor Hale did not disappear by accident, he was erased, and not completely, just enough to make the truth unreachable, unless you knew where to look. Unless you followed the only path that had not been altered. I reached for the device and connected it to my system, the screen lighting up with a soft glow that cut through the silence, and for a second, nothing happened, just a blank interface, waiting. Then a single file appeared, no name, no extension, just a timestamp, and that alone told me everything I needed to know. This was not meant to be found by anyone, only accessed by someone who already understood what it was. I opened it. Without hesitation, and the room seemed to close in slightly as the first image came into focus, not chaotic, not unclear, just precise, deliberate documentation, a location I recognized immediately, the same airfield mentioned in the report, but from a perspective that had never been recorded, never submitted, never seen, and as the footage continued, patterns emerged, movements that did not match any official account, sequences that filled in the gaps no one had questioned before. I did not look away, not even once, because this was the moment everything shifted from suspicion to certainty, and when it ended, the screen went dark again, silent, like it had done its job and nothing more. I exhaled slowly, the weight of it settling into something final, something irreversible, because the truth was no longer hidden, it was in front of me, clear and complete, and I understood exactly why it had been protected this way, why it had been left to survive through something no one would question, something no one would erase. I turned away from the screen and looked at him, and he was already watching me, not searching, not uncertain, just present, like he knew this was the moment. Everything changed. I stepped closer, slower than before, and lowered my hand, resting it gently against his head, not as a test this time, not as an experiment, just acknowledgement. You carried this, I said quietly, my voice steady, grounded. All this time, he did not move, did not react outwardly, but there was something in the way he held that stillness that answered me anyway, and I nodded once, more to myself than to him, because there was nothing left to question, only something left to do. I straightened and looked back at the screen, the reflection of both of us faint in the dark surface, and for the first time since this began, everything was clear, not just what happened, but what it meant, because the truth does not just exist to be known, it exists to change what comes next. And as I reached for my phone again, already knowing the steps I would take, I realized something that settled deeper than anything else. I did not find this dog by accident, and he did not survive by chance. He was the reason the truth made it this far, and now that it had reached me, there was only one outcome left, not revenge, not chaos, just something far more precise, the kind of correction that ensures a story is told the way it was meant to be, and this time, it would not be rewritten.